Well, I wanted to thank everyone for being here today. So we're happy to bring you another fireside interview with Cordan James Haveron, a wonderful exemplary figure in the adoptee community and as a mentor in New England area, and just a real success and tribute to military people everywhere. And we're really excited and looking forward to interacting with Cordan today, bringing you his story, discussing some of the points about transracial adoption, some of the complications there. And I think we're going to have a really great conversation here. So welcome, Cordan. We're very pleased to have you, and also having you as a member of Fireside.
Honored to be here and honored to be a member of Fireside. Thank you for everyone for coming as well.
We'll start with basic questions about when and where you were born.
All right. Excellent. So when and where I was born. So again, my name is Cordan James Haveron. I go by Cordan James. So I guess just to start, I was born in 1987 in Los Angeles, California, to a Caroline Simpson and a Marvin Kenneth Dean. And that's kind of the basics of where I started. Greg, do you want me to continue going from there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, sure. So I guess to jump right into it. So my mother at the time struggled with crack cocaine during the 80s. And so my dad was a well-known Crip member, which is a gang in Los Angeles. So he was a well-known gang member. And so as my mother continued to struggle with her addiction, once I was born, she made the choice to leave me in the hospital. And from there, I bounced around the foster system up until I was about 3 years old. So between different foster homes, and finally around the age of 3, I was adopted to a white family to a small town called Fillmore, Utah. As you know, there's not many Black people in Utah, as well as being adopted into a white family. Also raised Mormon, so they were a white Mormon family in Utah. And from there, so I became the youngest of 4. So I'm 34 now. I have an older brother, Britt, who's white and adopted. He was adopted before I was, and he's like a year and a half older than me. And then I have 2 older siblings that are about 3 to 4 years older than me. So I became the baby in that family.
Do you know, Cordan, why they decided on transracial adoption?
I don't. I would say the closest reason that I can think of is my adoptive mother had a best friend who adopted 3 Black children. So I would assume, close proximity, she decided.
And I'm sure that, as you've outlined here, growing up in a predominantly, if not almost exclusively, white environment must have had a substantial impact upon you. Did you find you ever struggled with identity issues or feelings of connection?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I guess, even if we talk about just the connection piece, there was always that difference of knowing that I was different than everybody, in my family and my community. I would say as far as identity goes, I had my grandfather was very racist. He actually hated that my parents adopted me. And was very loud and exclusive in his exchange of love and affection and attention towards me, to the point where my father and him actually fell out about it. They stopped talking after a small blow up.
Wow.
But
intense. Yeah.
It was a lot to learn. I can recall like my parents teaching me how to hug my sibling. Right. Mm-hmm. So it was very much like learning how to like be soft and grow into the family, into that family dynamic.
Did your parents at any point try to help you understand what you were going through, or were they compassionate about it?
So one thing I always talk about in my profession is that I grew up in therapy my whole life. Again, with previous, neonatal abstinence syndrome, which is being born from drugs. As soon as I was in their home, I was always with a psychologist or a therapist, give me whatever diagnosis that they think. So I always got it from the therapeutic sense of what I'm going through. I was definitely a child to ask a lot of questions. I wanted to hear about my parents often. I wanted to know, my mom would tell me today and I would ask, well, but remind me that part. Tell me this part again. So I was always obsessing over identity and wanting to know where I came from.
It sounds like they knew about information about your parents. You had that information from an early age then?
Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And
Absolutely.
that's something I think a lot of us don't have. So that's really interesting. Um,
Very true.
how did that affect you knowing from a young age? I have a different set of parents out there, and I even know their names and potentially what my name might have been, as you said.
Yeah. I would say it was tough because I would say that my parents were very apparent, um, that my birth parents were not good role models to follow. So I mean, I always knew their name, but I mean, we would watch Cops, like, watch TV as a family. We would watch Cops, and they'd always made it very apparent, like, that's a good Black person, that's a bad Black person, and this is what a
Oh,
good
wow.
Black person does. So it was very much, I get the feeling of like trying to, like, yeah, you don't want me to follow into gangs or drugs. I get that point, but that was also my parents you were talking about.
Yeah. And I think other adoptees, non-transracial adoptees, have that same experience of shaming about what their parents might have been like, or being stereotyped as they were bad people. They may have been undesirable people or marginal people that fringe. And I think a lot of us are painted with that, unfortunately. And it's definitely tragic that we internalize that to a degree, I think, and causes us to doubt things about ourselves, very fundamental things, and even question, what am I going to turn out like then? What if they were this way? And in your case, you did struggle with biologically the implications of around your birth, around the addiction and what it did to your system. So that's, I'm sure, something you've always had to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And to, kind of fully disclose. So I had gotten to a point, and I'm not going to take responsibility for this, but I had been at a point. So I went into rehab at 5 years old because I was addicted to cough syrup. So I would actually open the cough syrup and drink it. And then I got caught enough times that they actually sent me to rehab.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's definitely, yeah, definitely dealing with a lot. And, I wasn't, at the time when they adopted me, I couldn't speak. I couldn't, form full sentences at the age of 3. Was
Yeah.
very malnourished. So,
And part of your story is that you ended up back in the system again.
yeah, absolutely.
Can you talk about
Absolutely.
that?
Yeah. So I went back into the system around 12 years old. A lot was going on in school, a lot of fighting. Again, growing up in an all white area, I feel like everybody tried the N word at least one time. And I want to talk a little bit about my parents. So my adoptive father was the head custodian at our middle school, which sucked. Right. All those times Marxies, every time you got in trouble, my dad was there. Like, he would pull me out of class and give me the business and then send me back to class. But it just so much was going on in life. I was fighting a lot. I never turned down a fight. My dad was a third-degree black belt in Kenpo. So it was always growing up around structure and discipline. And he got me into wrestling at a young age because I was just so angry. Got me into wrestling. I did very well in wrestling. So just trying to get that pent up anger out. And I never really quite mastered that part of discipline. And so again, fighting a lot in schools, disruptive in schools too. I found identity through being the class clown. Right. So if I was funny in class, I wasn't Black anymore. It was just like everybody else. Right. And that's where I was. And so being funny in class meant disruptive in class. Just always talking, just like me now. I'm a motivational speaker now, so I guess it works.
Sure.
So up until around 12 years old, again, just going through a lot of stuff, struggling with relationships, just with my family, as well as, day-to-day relationships with my brother, friends, girlfriends. And it just hit that peak where they had enough. And so I went back into the foster care system right before my 13th birthday, which was a huge shock. So I want to talk about that too.
Yeah.
So, which was a huge shock. So growing up strict Mormon, where you went to church twice a week. Nicole, yes, your dad was a Kenpo teacher too. You know, we went to church often every Sunday for 3 hours. You know, every Tuesday you're going to Boy Scouts, very involved, to going back into foster care. So one, I didn't have my older brother anymore. Again, my brother being a year older than me, he and I were like, you know, anything that happened, we were everywhere together. We always handled life and fights and everything together. So to go into foster care, into a new home, is about 100 miles away from my adoptive family at the time. It was a lot.
Yeah.
The first foster family that I was with, they were Puerto Rican, and they were pastors of a born again Christian church. So there was a lot of dynamics there, because now I stopped going to the Mormon church.
Oh,
So
yeah.
now my parents are under this pretense that I must be getting worse because I'm not going to church anymore. Now I'm going to their church.
Oh, yeah.
A funny thing is, I actually drank coffee for the first time in foster care, which, you know, in the Mormon religion, coffee is a sin to drink. It was little things like that were just rebellious as I went in. But from there, I also had a lot of good going into the foster care system. So I was with the first family for about 9 months, and then they had decided that they were going to go run a group home. So I was transferred to another family, and this would be the family that I stayed with from 14 to 18. They were Mormon. Ron was a professional painter, owned his own company. Sandra had 6 other boys, including myself, in the house, ranging from, I think I was 14. So it was like 11 to 18 were the ages of the 7 kids. So she very much took care of us, took us to our appointments, school, therapy, all that such.
And then shortly after, I guess you would have gone into the military, right?
Yeah. So so ended up during that time while I was in foster care, I took a social emotional learning program in addition to my intensive therapy. And I got much more of a holistic approach. Like, we started to introduce a lot of books. So, you know, we read books like A Child Called It, which was very impactful because I never knew anybody else that had a horrible situation like mine. So just reading a lot of books, we started doing meditation, yoga, and planting things, things that I wasn't really used to in a therapy setting. So junior year or senior year, I was released back to mainstream high school from the group home, and graduated high school with a scholarship, academic scholarship. And probably so getting out at 18 was a lot, right? I didn't have the same experiences that most people at 18 had. I was always in foster care under strict rules. So I didn't date. I didn't go to high school dances or anything like that. So it was pretty much 18, I'm out of foster care and I'm getting my own place, figuring out a license, and doing all of this at one time. 4 months after graduating, and my second girlfriend ever got pregnant. We became pregnant, a better way to say. And so all I had known at that point was, you know, being raised in the church, was that no matter what happens is you take care of your family. So her parents were very much, you know, you guys should have an adoption. We obviously, I didn't want to have an adoption. I wanted to step up and raise my children. So we ended up getting married. So 6 months after graduating high school, we get married. We have another child, pregnant with a second child. I had just lost my job in Southern Utah. I was working at this glass fabrication company, and funny story. So working at this glass fabrication company, it's like $20 an hour. So I'm 18 with a wife, kid, $20 an hour in that area was great. So I go into work one day and I'm standing there talking to an associate, and he happens to be Black as well. So we had our normal conversation, go back into work, and my supervisor tells me he needs to talk to me in his office. So he begins to explain that they have a no tolerance policy when it comes to racial slurs. And so I was like, I'm not sure what you're talking about. So he begins to explain to me that in my conversation outside with another Black man, I happened to say that I was chilling my niggas this weekend. And somebody else overheard that and went and told my supervisor, and I actually got fired from that job.
Oh, wow.
So at that point, I didn't have any other options. Was sitting at a friend's house after my wife and son went to stay with their mother a couple miles away. I saw the ad in the newspaper for the U.S. Army, and so I called her up and asked what she thought. It was kind of a last resort. I figured I would go in, so I went in and signed up. Signed up as a cavalry scout in the United States Army. Decided to go on active duty full time. And from there, I ended up shipping out to Georgia, or excuse me, went to Kentucky for basic training, went to and then I stationed full time in Fort Stewart, Georgia, so about an hour outside of Savannah, Georgia.
And as I've been more familiar with your story, the military had a very salutary effect on you as a young person. Gave you a lot of structure and discipline. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was, excuse me, basic training was great in the sense that I'd already been kind of institutionalized. So I felt like basic training was very easy to enter. Upon joining, actually active duty military and, being a private, it was interesting. The structure was great. It was definitely what I needed. I found myself again in a mostly white space in the being infantry. And that was my first time actually ever having a Black leader. I never had a Black manager, a leader, or anything.
Yeah.
And that was huge for me, being close to another Black man and just his upheaval throughout everything, as well as just meeting great people who were, sacrificing their life, their family, their time. It was a bigger mission on my life than I could have imagined. And I feel like I needed that in a sense, to prove to myself that I could do it, to teach me the survival skills, the resilience skills. It also helped me form my identity better. They strip you down in basic training. You are no different than anybody else. You're all peons, and you're all getting yelled at and smoked together. And that was good to finally just like, there was no barriers. I remember I actually had a racial incident in basic training, and it was solved in like the most, like the way that it should be. Like it was very, very culturally sensitive. The drill sergeant, I remember the drill sergeant was like, everybody had to, because of this incident, everybody had to gather in a room. And he said, who in here has never met a white person? And people are raising their hands. Who in here has never met an Asian person? People are raising their hands. And like, I grew up around, small amounts of people, but I'd never seen that people had never met the opposite race but form an opinion on that race. So basic training is very much like, you guys are all the same. And, once I got into active duty, you had to trust them, right? Because they're in infantry, you have each other's back. That's all you have. And we traveled in small 3-man teams. So the guys to my right and my left were everything.
Absolutely. And did you find that, and I read part of this interview that you gave about that incident with the Black leader, and the way he engaged you and took it down to the level of respect me as a person, right? Respect me as a man.
Yes,
and
exactly.
How that was formative for you. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had one of these moments in the military where I was just feeling very picked on. I felt like they were asking me to do everything. And I didn't see why he wasn't asking the newbies next to me to go do the same thing. So he asked me to go do something. I said, nah, man, I have been doing everything that you asked. Go ask somebody else. So he went and got Sergeant Yates. Now they had just came home from Iraq. We ended up losing 3 guys in Iraq. So it was a very tumultuous time for us. And tensions were very high. So my level of disrespect as a newbie wasn't very well tolerated. And so when Sergeant Yates approached me, asking me to, snap into position, go to parade rest, as I was kind of mouthing back to him, he grabbed his rank off his chest, grabbed the rank off of mine, and told me that you need to respect me as a man before you respect my rank. And that was very pivotal in many senses of just respecting him for just who he is and not about all this military stuff, as well as being a Black leader. I'd never experienced that before.
And it sounds like the events in the military, and first of all, thank you very much for your service. It's very commendable, and we appreciate that. That they were formative for pretty much your life since that time. A lot of things, and I want to talk about the mentorship and that in just a few minutes here. But it sounds like this span of time that you spent in there had a very beneficial effect on who you became and the structure that it added to your life, and even parts of your identity that may have fallen into place because of it.
Absolutely.
I'm
So,
wondering, yeah, go ahead, please talk.
oh no, go ahead, Greg.
No, it was related to this. So you went to Iraq, right?
Yes, sir.
And you've mentioned that there's some people that were lost and tensions that were high, and everything that went into the interaction that you then had back with the unit or the leadership of the unit. And so you exited the military, but kept up with this level of regimentation and discipline that was beneficial for you. Did you find that once you left that you knew what you wanted to do with your life at that point, what you wanted to go into?
That's a big thing when you discharge from the military. When you start telling people you're going to discharge, they always like to put it out there that it's harder on the outside, that you're going to fail when you get out. So I kind of left the military with those senses of, this is very scary. I've had the same stability over these last few years of being in the military, so it's kind of remembering what I had gone through before that, before joining. And so when I came home from Iraq, so I was in Iraq December 2009 to December 2010. And so when I came home, I had about 6 months left on my active duty contract. And at the time I was writing a lot of poetry. I grew up writing poetry. Actually, when I joined foster care at 13, when I went back in, I started writing poetry. It kind of came out of nowhere. It's kind of one of those gifts that source blessed to me of being able to express myself.
Just materialized, yeah.
Literally out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And so I had continued doing that while I was in the military. I actually wrote a couple songs dedicated to military families at the time, and had got some attention of an entertainment company in Boston. And so when I came home from Iraq, they had invited me out to perform for a couple record labels, which was pretty cool and huge and exciting. And I actually got approved by my first sergeant, who was a big fan of my music. He actually approved me on special leave to go and perform. And so I flew out to Boston and visited, got to meet with these record labels. And upon leaving, the entertainment company asked if I was for sure getting out and if I would like to join them as their general manager of their entertainment company. So which I thought was huge. It was great. I never, it was an opportunity to say that I have something to do when I get out, that I have something to look forward to. And so, relocated out here to Boston. And it's been everything I can imagine.
That's great. So I'm also California born and raised, and ended up in Boston. as we kind of joked about here, I didn't know you were there, and I wish I had while I was still living there, since we only moved in October. That's unfortunate, but I'm certainly grateful we've connected now, and I'll be back, I think, in May. So I'm hoping we might have a chance to connect at that point. It's been a great place to be. I'm wondering, I wanted to shift a little bit to give you a chance to talk about biological relationships. So you knew about your family, you knew their names. I don't know if you knew how to be in touch with them or if you felt safe being in touch with them, but what was it like for you to try to connect with them?
Sure. So again, always knowing my biological parents' name, I would say, I always knowing it, and I would read like phone books to try to find my mom. Right? I would try to find her name somewhere. I would search phone books in my area, and I'll never forget the first time we got like dial-up internet.
Yeah.
Right. First time getting dial-up internet. I remember like logging in and trying to I want to say Google, but I don't remember what it was back then. But I tried to Google my mom's name and try to find addresses and such. I was definitely a kid that always threatened to leave. When my parents and I would have bad fights, I would tell them just to send me back to Los Angeles. Like I would rather go back to that. And so I graduated at 18. 6 months after that, so actually right after I got married, 2 weeks after I got married, my adoptive father passed away, um, due to a drug addiction. Um, at that time is when my mother revealed to me, she handed me a letter and it said State of Los Angeles, and I opened it and it says I have 6 biological siblings. Now, I didn't grow up with, I knew my parents' names, but they never told me that I had biological siblings.
Wow.
So, of course, I continued what I always had done, looking for them. And it took me about a week. I went and jumped on MySpace. Everybody remembers MySpace.
Yeah.
So I went and jumped on MySpace and typed in Deshaun Dean and saw this young Black man and sent him a message saying, hey, here's who I am. Here's who I'm looking for. I wonder if you can help me. And it probably took like 2 hours. And I was in college at the time, studying psychology. And just I'm sitting in the big old library, and I get this ping back, and it says, "Hey brother, we've always known about you. Here's my phone number." And so from that moment forward, probably 2 hours after that, I got my big sister's phone number. So in my biological family, out of 9 kids in total. So kind of a tricky story here. So 9 kids in total that my mother had. 2 she lost due to her addiction. So it went my oldest sister, Carmentina, who's I think maybe like 41, maybe now. So about 8 years older than me. And then my other sister, Marnita, who's about 4 years older than me. And then my mother lost 2 in between there. And then I was born with my addiction. And then I have 2 younger brothers and 2 younger sisters. So ranging from the ages of 21 up to 41.
Yeah.
So there's 7 of us all together. I am the 3rd oldest, which I went from being the baby of the other family to now having 4 younger siblings. And that was tough. So anyway, I get in contact with my mother finally. We talked on the phone for a little bit. She super hesitant to talk on the phone. I was super anxious to talk on the phone, so I wasn't very patient. My sister explained to me, she'll call you soon. And it was it was a good conversation. She was very, open, said this was new to her, that she was very emotional on the phone. After we finished that, she ended up writing me a letter kind of explaining her life and who she is now. And then shortly after that, I went into the military. I remember her sending me a message and asking me if she could have some money for a car breakdown or something. And so I was like, yeah, of course. So a few minutes later, I get a text from my sister and she says, hey, did mom call you? And I was like, yeah, she did. She said she's having car problems and she asked me to send her some money. And that's when she told me that, mom still has an addiction. And so do not send her money. Okay. And so for me, that was like walls were back up. Now, you're still doing the same thing 19 years later that you lost me for. So it was very much a huge trigger for me. Yeah. And so that was just immediate, put the walls back up, and things have been kind of on and off since then, up until last November. So my birthday's in November. My sister randomly just texted me and said, hey, I want to go half on tickets for you to come home for your birthday. So I flew to Los Angeles and spent my 34th birthday with my whole family.
Wow.
And it was overwhelming, but it afforded me a big conversation with my mom, that we couldn't have been, I guess it was the best way we couldn't have been better prepared for it. It's definitely a conversation that I wasn't ready for a few years ago. I was definitely still angry and had a lot of passion around things. And I think, and she was, deeper in her struggles as well. So now was just a good time for us to be able to talk to each other and express unconditional love to each other. I was able to ask, I wanted to really understand who she is. I think that's where I'm at in life, is understanding if she's open to it, just understanding who you are. It's not even about, at this point, I accept who she is, right? If she's a human being with an addiction, I understand that. And that's just who she is.
Yeah. There's so much that I have similar experiences of in terms of what it was like to connect, in terms of people that I found very, very recently in my case,
Sure.
in terms of how the conversation with my birth mother went at the beginning.
Yeah.
Didn't ask for money, or she wasn't struggling with some of the same things, but yeah, and I felt impatient too. I want to move forward. I want to move forward. And it can be difficult knowing that someone else wants to hold back a little bit because they kind of have to. They feel like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm in a place where this is a lot for me, and
Right.
makes us as adoptees chomping at the bit to because we haven't had this. They haven't either, obviously, but we're working on restraint to a degree. Like, oh, this is going to be hard. I
Yeah.
wonder what this is going to unfold like. I'm going through that myself, and so I appreciate your perspective on that. Did you find that your biological family had any feelings about the fact that you had been raised in a white family? Did they ever talk about that?
No, honestly, they're very respectful of that situation. I know my sister, my sister is very welcoming towards my mother. So my sister, that's a year older than me, about 3 years older than me. You would think we grew up together. We haven't skipped a beat. We are the best of friends. That is we have like hour-long conversations on the phone. She's really close to my children. I'm really close with hers. But I don't have that with the other siblings. It's acknowledgement and spending time together, but it's not like my sisters and I is. And she grew up with them. So, but we just have something special.
Yeah.
My mother's, that's weird to say, my biological mother and my adoptive mother, they've talked. I will say it's gotten kind of awkward, especially on like Facebook, where like one mom will be like, "I love you, son," and then another mom will be like, "I love you more." And it's like I start to notice like people like chippery, I don't know, mother stuff. I don't know. So they've had those moments. They don't associate on a normal level. Adoptive mother, I think her impression when I told her that I found my family was, don't forget me. She just wanted to make sure that, she was honored and respected, and that because I found my biological family, that I'm not going to run away from her. So.
Related to the transracial adoption, and we know that Coco's listening in, and she was same race adoption, but also raised in a white setting that was challenging in a lot of ways for her sense of identity. We've talked with her. Do you feel like transracial adoptees are being heard more clearly than they maybe were in the past? In terms of what this experience is like? Yeah.
I do, and I would say it's because of the work that we're all doing, though, right? We as adoptees have created this platform of speaking up and sharing our experiences and advocating and consulting with other agencies and adoption agencies, and talking. We're in conversations with families now. So I feel like adoptees overall are being heard more. I feel like transracial adoptees are being heard more. I actually didn't even know the term transracial adoption until last year. Like finding that hashtag transracial adoptee and then finding other people who have the same experiences. I never knew that.
Do you have any words for, obviously transracial adoption will continue, and there's so many feelings about it and perspectives on it that are all valid at this point, and I'm not qualified as a member of that conversation, but I'm wondering if you would have words for adoptive parents who might be considering transracial adoption. Are there things that you would like for them to know or to think about in that process?
What I would say is, give me just one second, just responding. I would say have the same investment in your adoptive child as you do if you have biological children. And what I mean by that, in the sense, I did an interview with someone pursuing their doctorate degree the other day, and they were talking about this exact same thing. She was asking kind of like subjects around like, did your foster adoptive family teach you about education, or did they talk to you about college and things like that? And it was also the contrast that they never did talk to me about that, but their biological children all have degrees and such like that. So I think it's things like that of like realizing what you can do for your child to make them feel more comfortable. I feel like now is more of an opportunity for transracial families to understand the complexities than it was in the 90s when my parents adopted. Yeah, just be involved. I don't know, that's a tough one.
Yeah, and certainly we will. Oops, one problem. I have a little internet connection here, but should be okay in just a minute. Okay, can you see me okay?
Yeah.
Making sure we can continue with that.
Mm.
Oh yeah, and we'll get to the question in just a couple minutes, Coco. I didn't want to discourage you from answering, but we'll finish the recorded piece and then we'll address all the questions and comments. Thank you so much for that. And I actually had this question that came up in the chat is one I had written down too, which is you went back and reunited with your adoptive parents after having gone back in the system.
Yeah.
What was that experience like for you?
Deep breath. It was a nightmare. Easiest way to put it. When I went back into foster care, that was kind of like the start of the dissolution to us as a family. Again, with all the changes of being in a different, being in a different religious home, as well as, being in therapy and such, I feel like my parents got to this point where I was just labeled this bad kid in their mind. And it was not the conversations we would have in like our group therapy sessions, we had to eventually stop those because it would become very, it wasn't healthy anymore. And so my therapist actually stopped our family meetings because we would bicker back and forth. Around the age of 16 years old, my father, I was actually preparing to go back home from foster care. Like I had like conversations with my support team about being released and going back home and continuing therapy on, in a more of a hybrid theory. And that didn't happen, as my father had told me that I am no longer a Haveron, and kind of denounced me and hung up the phone.
Wow.
So from like 16 to 18, we didn't talk at all. As well, that kept me from my older brother as well. So our relationship suffered from there. And so around the age of 18, I contacted my brother, told him, hey, we're going to college. I've got some money saved up. I'm going to take you down to college with me. We'll work on our relationship there. But that involved bringing my parents back into the picture, which was extremely awkward. They still tried to kind of parent, even though they hadn't been there for those last 5 years. And then after my father passed away, like I said, 6 months after graduating, I decided I was just going to sweep things under the rug. Like I felt like my dad's death was so traumatic to the family that whatever I was feeling could be talked about at a later time. But right now I just need to support my mother and my siblings. And so over the years with my mother, we've tried to have those conversations. But mom either just doesn't remember, I don't remember that, or I don't remember when that happened, or I don't remember you ever going through that. So there's a lot of amnesia to the past.
Yeah.
And so there's really I haven't made any gains with her in quite a long time. We actually don't talk very much. My son and I love you here and there.
Hi.
Bye, Kelly.
Uh-oh. Yeah, I think that was an accident. Yeah, so that's a lot of processing, right? And it sounds like it's still a sore or painful area. A lot of feelings around that still, right?
Yeah, a lot of feelings around that. I mean, when I discharged out of the military, I could have gone home. I could have gone back to Utah, but I didn't feel like it was good for me to be back there. It didn't feel safe after the stability that I was able to create. It didn't feel safe to go back there. And unfortunately, that meant not going back home to my sons. And that was a huge and very hard decision.
I wanted to give you a chance to talk about what it's been like to be a leader and a mentor, and the important work you're doing with kids. And can you talk about your program and
Yeah.
how that's gone for you? Because that's really inspirational for us to hear about that.
Thank you, Greg. Absolutely. So, as I had said earlier, I took a social emotional learning program from when I was in foster care, 13 through 18. And that program is called the Y Try program, which is created by a licensed clinical social worker and Christian. And so around this time last year, again, you know, I've been speaking for a couple of years, but I was curious what the Y Try program was still doing. And so I was able to find them. They're still around 20 something years later. They're doing very well. So I reconnected with them, was able to reconnect with Christian, who taught me when I was, a young teenager. And so the Comeback Kids Mentorship program, our slogan is where comeback kids come back stronger, which is two parts. One, the comeback is, of course, about your healing path, your journey. And then the comeback stronger is not only are you continue to better yourself and heal, but you also come back for those that are lost along the way. And so, my slogan is that it's called the HARD path, HARD, which stands for healing, advocacy, resilience, and discipline. And so all my programs are dedicated towards advocating, towards healing spaces, towards talking about strength and inspiring strength, and most of all, our personal assignment of being disciplined in what we do. And so at this time, I lead a couple of different groups. One of my newest projects is working with 15 Black children. I say children, they're in the middle school aged youth. We're creating an advocacy program inside of their high school. They're dealing with a lot of different struggles in school, just regular, from their immigration, just learning how to acclimate and find their identity. It's in New Hampshire, which is just like Utah. It's very, dominant culture is not the African culture. And so I had a meeting with them the other day. We sat in a room and just talked about what they're going through in their schools. And, I got to hear their stories of what they're experiencing. And I got to hear their heartbreak that they feel like things aren't ever going to change. And then a young boy said, he said this big quote, but the gist of it was that we're stronger together. And the whole room kind of burst out in daps and hugs and embrace that idea that we are stronger together. And so that's one program I'm working on, as well as doing a lot of different work I work with another organization called the On Your Feet Foundation, which is, it's support for birth mothers after placement.
Oh, wow.
So birth mothers that have given their children up for adoption, this is support for them to be able to get back stable. So I'm on the board there and do some consulting with them, as well as working in schools and presenting this Y Try curriculum as well.
Very, very inspirational to hear. I imagine you encounter adopted children as well.
Yes, absolutely. So working alongside DCF, and one school I work in has 45 children, and most of them are in DCF custody. And I just think it's so crucial because there's not a whole lot of people that are really trauma informed, that really understand.
Right.
They just don't understand the identity piece. They don't understand why these kids are acting out, and they don't know how else to label them but bad kids.
Yeah, I think the trauma informed piece that you just hit on is so critical for this, and exposure and education, even to therapists, or that they need to be trauma informed, and they might not be, they weren't prepared for it, is critical. So I'm really pleased that you brought that up. I think in general, that's a really big challenge for adoptees, and to find in one-on-one settings the right people that are a fit for them, that do understand their trauma. So you're a great advocate for this. Thanks so much. What I'd like to do now is, first of all, thank you for your time and meeting with us today. It's been great. I want to thank everybody who, yeah, go ahead.
Can I add just one more thing?
Oh, absolutely.
Just that this is very important. I didn't get to say this earlier, but I want to acknowledge that my mother and I are on a good path.
Okay.
We're finally in a good space where we can talk to each other. So one of my brothers is incarcerated. He's a well-known gang member. So it's kind of interesting to see my biological family, because there's different paths that you see that you could have gone on, and see where people are. But my younger brother is a well-known blood member, and he's in prison right now, doing I believe a life sentence. And so she had just recently asked me to write a letter alongside him, as he's in prison, so helping her write a letter. So like day by day, we're making progress. We're talking, we're sending each other text messages and working on things. And we're both in a vulnerable position to just be unconditional loving towards each other. So just wanted to add that.
Oh, absolutely. And before I finish or conclude the recorded piece, there's an important question here that I'd like to give you a second to talk about, so that we can get this as part of the YouTube, which is, I'm just going to read Coco's question. Growing up in a predominantly white community and how that's shaped your relationships with white people now. And can you talk about that for a minute, and things that you might have done to reclaim your Blackness? Those are very important questions, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just read over that.
Sure.
Coco, just to address that, I have a friend who asks me all the time, is like, how do you do what you do? And it kind of sounds like a rhetorical question, but I realize that sometimes it's not comfortable as Black people to be in these predominantly white spaces. And it is a very scary thing to be in. I don't know. In regards to like claiming my Blackness and being in these spaces, I practice a lot of Afro-centered things in my life. Like Kwanzaa, you have the 7 principles of Kwanzaa. I study those on a daily basis for me, right? Those are something that myself and my children do. We're always studying. We're very big in the history. We are very involved in the community. And I would say like things like that are make me feel safe in this space of reclaiming my identity and reminding little Black kids that they are loved and that they are seen and heard and important, and that there is hope. And I think as far as white people in this sense, I have a very universal love. Part of my affirmations are that I am a human, but I'm also a Black human, right? I'm a human and I love everyone. And nothing is more important to me than to continue that level of love. But when I go outside this door, I realize that I'm a Black man, and that to some people, that matters. So I think being able to combine that I am a human allows me to work in these spaces, because I don't always see the ugliness around me. There are very many beautiful people in the world who embrace and who, the civil rights movement was fought with Black and white people. Like that freedom that we have is something that we both attained. So I think just have to be in the space, and have to work on your self-care and have these conversations.
That was a great question. What a thoughtful and important answer. Thank you so much for that. We certainly want everybody from all these perspectives and experiences to have a chance to talk. So that's great. She's happy. She loves that answer. So thank you so much for that, Coco, and Cordan for your answer there as well. So what I'll do is I'll conclude this part by thanking everybody for joining today, and also all the people who have been watching on YouTube, our YouTube channel, Fireside Adoptees. We're grateful for that and appreciate and your subscription to that. If you'd like to come and see the interviews we've done, we've got a few up there now, and we'll continue to do so. So we're appreciative of that. I'll conclude the recording at this point, and then we'll go into a question and answer session. So thanks so much to everyone.